Hey everybody, what is going on? Hexalex here. So today I want to talk a little bit about the Ryzeal metagame as opposed to Ryzeal as a deck. But more than actually talking about Ryzeal itself, what I actually want to talk about are hand traps. So as far as hand traps go, what hand traps are being played in this current meta, I think is going to hugely be different from what was popular in the last meta. So what I wanted to do is go through a little bit of a breakdown through some talking points about hand traps that were played when Malice was big versus hand traps that I think should be played now, why these shifts have happened, and which hand traps are going to be less, and also which ones are going to be more impactful. This is kind of something a little bit new that I'm trying, similar style to other videos I've made, but a little bit of a new concept. So if you like it and want to see more videos like this, please let me know in the comments below. Really appreciate the support, but let's just go ahead and get right on into it. First up, we have Artifact Lancia and Chaos Hunter. These cards were pretty popular before, but I think they're no longer worth main decking. Mostly because there's not enough Malice going around right now for these to be worth playing, and these cards don't really do much of anything against Ryzeal. So these cards I've been seeing a lot in not just decks in general, but even in Ryzeal decks. I think people are kind of like automatically deferring to a lot of their old non-engine lineups, and that's a mentality that you really gotta shake, especially coming into this metagame, because the only way I would play Lancia and Chaos Hunter moving forward is if Malice was making up a significant portion of the meta, if it was seeing a substantial amount of play. And right now, especially with new deck hype, I think Ryzeal is gonna end up being a lot more popular. If after the dust settles in a couple of months, Malice is seeing like as much or maybe even somehow slightly more play than Ryzeal, then I would maybe consider playing these cards again. But I think Ryzeal is not only going to be the more powerful deck in the long run, which means they'll see more play more than likely, but again, it's got new toy syndrome right now. It's the newest deck on the block, and it's what a lot of people are playing. And again, these cards just do not do anything against Ryzeal. If Ryzeal had even a little bit of banishing, I would maybe consider these, because, it's not just that these cards hard countered Malice, right? They did actually have a lot of applications against a lot of other decks. Crystron was a big one, but really any deck that used any amount of banish setup, even something like Sprite with Swat Frog and Ronin Totem, felt the impact of getting hit with an Artifact Lancia in the right circumstance. But yeah, again, with Ryzeal as popular as it is and how little these cards do against it, I really don't think it's worth playing. These cards are actually the main reason I wanted to make this video. I have been seeing so many Ryzeal deck lists in Master Duel through Duel Lives and through what my opponent's playing, and I see so many people with Lancias in here, and they're just not doing anything in this current metagame. So if nothing else, definitely for the next couple weeks while Ryzeal is huge, just take these out of your deck. But honestly, I wouldn't really main deck them moving forward. If you play in best of 3, community tournaments or something, side decking is obviously different. I would definitely still consider siding these for the Malice matchup, or even something like Crystron potentially. But yeah, as far as best of 1 ranked ladder goes, just don't play these cards moving forward. Next up, I want to talk a little bit about Nibiru, the Primal Being, because this is a card that hasn't been as impactful as in previous formats. There's a couple of main reasons for this, but I think the main one is that most meta decks right now really just have a solid built-in strategy to handle Nibiru. Whether they're putting up negates before Nibiru drops on the board, or they have a way to play around it altogether. It really seems like as decks are coming out, this card in particular is becoming slightly less effective over time. Of course, with Ryzeal, they can set up the field spell, Ryzeal Cross, which can very easily negate Nibiru on resolution as well. So Cross plus plugin, although it doesn't seem like it, maybe, if you're not used to the mechanic of a negating effect on resolution, that actually does work the way you want it to, unlike a lot of other negates. Of course, that's not, unique to Ryzeal, though. Malice, another very recent meta deck, has the ability to, in a fair number of combo lines, set up a 2-material Appaloosa before it hits the 5th summon. But even, not factoring in all these little sort of safety valves that the 1-card combo lines have against Nibiru specifically, there's also the fact that with a lot of decks, if they have even one extender, that's often enough to push through the Nibiru. And again, I would attribute this a little bit more to power creep, as cards are just becoming slightly more efficient over time. In, you know, previous years, extenders often required you to have like some amount of main deck commitment to the board. But like, look at Sword Ryzeal, for example. I only very recently realized, like, oh, that this card can summon if I have a Ryzeal monster in hand, or on field rather, or in graveyard, which is absolutely absurd. And yeah, you know, Malice has stuff like Link Spider. Really, Nibiru is just kind of a known quantity at this point. But I'm not as down on Nibiru as I am on something like Artifact Lancia and, you know, Chaos Hunter, right? Well, because one, again, those cards are only good against one, well, they only really shine, I should say, in one very specific matchup. But Nibiru I still like, not only because it is still a very solid card against rogue decks, which don't have the ability to prepare for it as easily as a lot of the current meta decks. I think on top of that, this card is still very useful when timed well. Not just when timed well, actually, but when played in conjunction with another hand trap. Something like Valor, Imperm, or Ash Blossom alongside a Nibiru makes me feel pretty confident if I open them both going second. But I think the timing well is a very important thing to think about, right? To use Nibiru efficiently, it really does require you to know your opponent's combo lines, because you'll know the best time to drop it, which is usually before they have the ability to negate it. However, there are some matchups like Primite Blue Eyes where 9 times out of 10, they won't make a negate, and you can actually just drop Nibiru during the end phase. But, again, knowing whether you can drop Nibiru right away, or, you know, whether you have to do it at a certain point, or whether you have to wait till the end of the turn, this all requires you to have knowledge of whatever deck your opponent is playing. That's why I really like Nibiru. I think it remains one of the more skill-testing hand traps to use, and also to play against as well. Well, kind of to play against. In the past, it was more like, you know, can you hold up a resource that you can play through Nibiru, you know, while playing around it? But now, again, most decks have kind of what feels like a bit of a built-in way to handle it. So as far as whether or not to play Nibiru, I still like playing a single copy. It's always nice to have something really impactful to draw off a Max C. And honestly, there are a lot of situations where people can play against Nibiru, but for whatever reason, whether it's to gain advantage or end on a slightly better board, they just simply choose not to. So I like this card. I'll be continuing to probably main deck a copy in most decks, but I will say this much. This is one of those formats where I'm considering a little bit more than usual cutting Nibiru. And, you know, if a deck is able to play a hand trap like Joel and Lockbird, which is really good against Ryzeal, while also being good against Maxi and Fulos, I would probably consider that over Nibiru, and, you know, some other hand traps in certain other situations. All in all, I think it's still pretty solid, though. It just really does have not quite as much universal impact as it did before. That doesn't mean Nibiru is bad, though. Alright, I already touched on Joel and Lockbird a little bit, but I think this card is very good in this meta, particularly against Ryzeal. The other thing to consider about Joel and Lockbird is that it's not just a good hand trap to use against other decks, but it's also really good to use against other decks, engines that is, but it's also really good to use against Maxi and Fulos in certain decks. It really just depends on how impactful Joel and Lockbird is when it comes to the deck that you're playing, right? Now, the reason this card hasn't been seeing quite as much play as it has before is that it wasn't as good against Malice, right? It's certainly not as good as Lancia or Chaos Hunter, but even in general, Malice tends to play through Joel and Lockbird fairly easily compared to a lot of other decks. So, for that reason, you tend not to see it too much. But we are definitely going to be seeing it more in this meta. And I think Malice is one of those decks you'll see it a lot in. Again, because of how good it is against Ryzeal. You know, with Ryzeal, they're using 7th Ascension to search for 7th Tachyon, to search for, you know, the Sword Ryzeal, which is going to search for something, or the X Ryzeal, which is going to search for something. I don't think it's, you know, too difficult to see just how impactful Joel and Lockbird is, given the state of the metagame with Ryzeal being as good as it is. Now, when it comes to how many copies of this card to play, I think Joel and Lockbird is actually one of the more flexible hand traps, because you only really need one copy to have a huge impact. It's not something you typically want to see multiples of, and it's also not something you want to see in every single game, again, because it's a little more situational of how good it is. A little bit more. I have to stress that a little bit more. I think mainly the decks you would want to play 3 Droll and Lockbird in are decks where you are able to play through the Droll and Lockbird yourself. Now, when it comes to Ryzeal, which can't play through Droll and Lockbird, you could still make an argument for playing 3 copies of this card simply because of the mirror match. I think at the end of the day, how much this card sees play in the meta is going to depend on how much Ryzeal there is in the meta. And I think the more Ryzeal there is, the more Ryzeal will play more copies of Droll and Lockbird. I like having at least one as a crossout target, but this is definitely one of the more impactful cards of the current metagame, and if you're really looking for an easy one-to-one swap in your decks, if you weren't playing Droll and Lockbird before, I think you could simply take out your Artifact Lancias and replace them with the same amount of Droll and Lockbirds, and generally speaking, that will be good enough. Now, again, every deck plays differently, and every deck should require different hand trap choices and ratios, so always look to your specific deck and rely on that knowledge of that deck, first and foremost. But if you're really looking for a quick shortcut, you can minus Lancia plus Droll in this meta in your decks that we're playing Lancia, and I think you'll be good to go. One other card that I do want to talk about is Ghost Ogre and Snow Rabbit. Ghost Ogre is a card that really started seeing a lot of play when Blue Eyes came out, of course being good, against their continuous trap card, which not only stops the effects but also destroys all of their stuff. However, this card has remained very solid, as it seems like every meta deck out there has one really good target for Ghost Ogre to hit, something really impactful. For Blue Eyes, it's obviously the True Light. I think it's True Light, right? Yeah, because the Dark Magician one is True Name, I believe. But, for the Blue Eyes deck, it's True Light. For the Malice deck, there's Malice and Underground. You could also potentially do something like Splash Mage at certain points of the combo line. But Malice and Underground is generally a pretty good target, whether they lead with it or use it mid-combo. Assuming they don't have Appaloosa set up, of course. And in Ryzeal, there's Ryzeal Duo Drive, because much like Gigantic Sprite, Ryzeal Duo Drive actually detaches as part of the effect, not as a cost. Meaning that if Duo Drive activates its effect and you respond with Ghost Ogre, you destroy it, it doesn't have any materials, ergo they don't get the searches. And they're down a body to send off something like Ryzeal Node, even if they had that in hand for follow-up, right? So I think that Ghost Ogre is something that should be considered before a lot of other hand traps right now. Again, I see people on not just Lancia and Chaos Hunter, but even Ghost Bell. I think Ghost Bell was a lot better, in the Malice meta, and is still not awful now, but Ghost Ogre, I think, definitely has a lot more impact, and is a lot more generically sort of applicable than you might think. Definitely a hand trap to consider for sure. And finally, I don't think I really need to say it, but stuff like Maxi, Ash Blossom, Valor, Imperm, Thualos, all still as good as they were before. These are, if you're, not really sure what specific hand traps you should use in your deck, or given the current meta, these should be the ones you tend to default to. Thualos is going to see a little bit more play than it has recently because of the fact that it can be used in Ryzeal. But Valor and Imperm, you might think of these as weaker hand traps because they do tend to be lower impact, not just against Ryzeal, but in general. But I do think it is really important to have some amount of copies of Effect Valor and Imperm, or at the very least consider them, because what they lack in impactfulness, they more than, you know what I mean, they really make up for when it comes to versatility, right? They're useful in literally just about every single matchup, especially Imperm, which can be used on your turn as well as your opponent's. So even if you top deck it going second, you can still use it against one of their end board pieces. And even against Ryzeal, there are a lot of hands where your opponent's only going to have one of their one-card starters, and if they go normal summon Ice Ryzeal and you Valor it and they don't have anything else, they're not going to be able to combo. So there are still situations where Valor and Imperm are going to be enough to end your opponent's turn. All in all, these hand traps also pair really well with another hand trap. Valor plus Imperm by itself seems pretty meh, but when you have a Nibiru or even an Ash Blossom or a Droll or Maxi, something a little more impactful, alongside that Valor or Imperm, then it looks a lot more appealing. So don't sleep on Effect Valor and Imperm. You might think they're weak, it's really easy to fall into that kind of trap, but I can definitely tell you that these cards are very good still. That seems a little obvious, but I would very much consider maining them in Ryzeal meta. I think they're quite good right now. But definitely let me know what you think. Let me know if this style of video helped you out. And if so, I'll definitely do something more like this in the future. But for now, that's going to do it. So let's go ahead and move on to our outro. Hey everybody, Hexlex here. Thank you so very much for watching all the way to the very end of the video, which by the way is one of the best ways to support the channel. Speaking of supporting the channel, take a look at the names on screen. These are folks who have been so generous as to either join as a YouTube member or subscribe over on patreon.com/Hexlex to support. There's also perks for doing so. If you would like to see YouTube videos early, as well as some exclusive videos that get uploaded to YouTube, but for one reason or another I decide not to publish, definitely go ahead and hit that join button to see content early, as well as some exclusive content. If you're looking for more exclusive content, over on patreon.com, I upload exclusive videos that are not posted on YouTube just about every single day. Whether you choose to subscribe over on Patreon, join as a YouTube member, or simply continue to watch, your support is greatly appreciated. Thank you so very much. But for now, this is Hexlex. I am signing out, and I hope that you have a fantastic day.